The crimson moons of Xerion 7 cast an eerie glow across the battlefield's remnants as Kiraveth limped through the scattered debris of what had once been a thriving outpost. Her pale green skin, normally luminescent under starlight, appeared, dull and mottled with dried blood and alien dust. Red hair, once her pride, flowing like liquid fire down her back, now hung in matted tangles around her shoulders. Each step sent waves of agony through her damaged left leg, the bone improperly set after the explosion that had claimed her reconnaissance team. The Varnathi military compound loomed ahead, its bioluminescent towers pulsing with the steady rhythm that once meant home and safety. Now, as Kira approached the energy barrier that marked the perimeter, those same lights felt cold and unwelcoming. She could already see the guards' expressions shifting from relief to disgust as they took in her appearance. The jagged scar, running from her left temple to her jaw, the way she favored her wounded leg, the defeat written in every line of her body. "Open the barrier," she called out, her voice hoarse from 3 days in the wasteland. The guards exchanged glances. Lieutenant Zethmore, once her friend and sparring partner, now looked at her with barely concealed revulsion. "Kiraveth, of the 3rd Reconnaissance Unit," he announced formally. "You are ordered to report directly to Commander Vextor." The compound's main thoroughfare, usually bustling with activity, seemed to part before her like a diseased river. Fellow soldiers who had once nodded respectfully now turned away, their expressions ranging from pity to outright disgust. In Varnathi, culture returning wounded from battle was seen as a failure of will, a spiritual weakness that could contaminate others. The scars marking her face proclaimed her shame to all who looked upon her. Commander Vextor waited in his command chamber, his silver-streaked green skin marking him as one of the honored elders. His forearms, a genetic gift that marked him as blessed by their ancestors, remained perfectly still as she entered. Behind him, the battle maps of Xerion 7 glowed with tactical markers, showing the ongoing war between the Varnathi Empire and the human colonial forces. "Report," he commanded without looking at her. Kira straightened as much as her injuries allowed. "Sir, the scouting mission to Sector 7 was compromised. Human forces had established a hidden outpost in the crystalline caves. My team was eliminated. I am the sole survivor." "Sole survivor." The words dripped with contempt. "Tell me, Scout Kiraveth, how does one survive when her team does not? What bargain did you make with the humans? What weakness did you show?" "Sir, I fought with honor. The explosion that marked your face and crippled your leg, the explosion that you alone survived?" Vextor finally turned to face her, his black eyes cold as the void between stars. "Look at yourself. You bear the marks of defeat, of compromise. In the old ways, warriors who returned thus were given the mercy of a clean death." Kira felt her world crumbling around her. She had served faithfully for 8 cycles, had earned commendations for valor, had bled for the Empire. "Commander, please, I can still serve. My mind is sharp, my aim true. Your presence dishonors this unit." His voice cut through her pleas like a vibroblade. "The sight of your weakness undermines morale. The stench of your failure clings to you like decay. Sir, you are hereby stripped of rank and expelled from service. You have 1 hour to gather your personal effects and leave this compound. You are forbidden from entering any Varnathi military installation. Find healing if you can, Kiraveth. Alone." The dismissal hit her like a physical blow. Around the chamber, junior officers who had once looked up to her now studied their feet or their data pads, anywhere but at her scarred face. The silence stretched endlessly until she managed a weak salute with her trembling hand. "Understood, sir." The hour passed in a blur of shame and mechanical actions. Her few possessions fit easily into a single pack, a change of clothes, her personal weapon, a small amount of ration credits. The barracks that had been her home for years suddenly felt alien, the walls seeming to close in as former comrades avoided even meeting her eyes. As she reached the compound's exit, Zethmore appeared beside her. For a moment, hope flared in her chest. Perhaps one friend remained. "I'm sorry, Kira," he said quietly, not looking at her. "But you understand. The others are already talking. They say defeat is contagious, that the weak call to the weak. I have my own career to consider. The energy barrier shimmered open one final time for her, then sealed shut with a finality that echoed in her bones. She stood in the alien wilderness, truly alone for the first time in her life, with nowhere to go and no one who would accept her. The twin moons cast their red light across the desolate landscape as Kiraveth began walking toward the neutral zone, each step taking her further from everything she had ever known and deeper into an uncertain future where even survival seemed like a distant hope. The neutral zone stretched endlessly before Kiraveth, a barren wasteland of crystalline formations and jagged rock outcroppings that caught the red moonlight like broken glass. She had been walking for 2 days now, her injured leg screaming, with each step, her water supply dwindling to nothing. The Varnathi military compound was a distant glow on the horizon behind her, growing fainter with each passing hour. Her strength finally gave out near a cluster of twisted metal, the remains of some ancient battle between her people and the humans. She collapsed against a piece of debris, her breathing labored, vision blurring at the edges. This was where she would die, she realized with a strange sense of peace. At least here, in the emptiness between worlds, no one would see her final weakness. The sound of approaching footsteps made her hand instinctively reach for her weapon, though she barely had the strength to lift it. Through the haze of exhaustion and pain, she saw a figure emerge from behind a rocky outcropping, tall, bipedal, wearing the distinctive dark blue uniform of the human colonial forces. Corporal Dante Rivera had been patrolling the neutral zone for 3 weeks now, a mind-numbing assignment that kept him away from the real fighting. His dark hair was cropped short in military fashion, and his brown eyes held the weariness of someone who had seen too much war. He wasn't supposed to be here. His patrol route officially ended 2 clicks back, but something had drawn him deeper, into the wasteland. When he spotted the collapsed figure, his first instinct was caution. The pale green skin and red hair marked her as Varnathi, one of the enemy. But as he approached, weapon ready, he saw something that made him pause. She wasn't reaching for a weapon or trying to call for backup. She was simply waiting to die. Need a hand? The words came out before he could stop them, his voice carrying across the silence. Kiraveth's eyes focused on him with effort. She expected to see hatred or at least cold military efficiency. Instead, she found something she hadn't seen in days: concern. You should go, she whispered in heavily accented standard. Your people, mine. Not supposed to. Yeah, well, my people and your people do a lot of things that don't make much sense, Dante replied, lowering his weapon and kneeling beside her. Up close, he could see the extent of her injuries, the still healing scar across her face, the way she held her left leg, the exhaustion that went deeper than physical fatigue. When's the last time you had water? 2 days, she admitted, her pride warring with desperation. Dante unslung his pack and pulled out his water bottle, offering it to her. When she hesitated, he pressed it into her hands. Drink. That's an order from someone who's been carrying wounded soldiers for longer than I care to remember. As she drank, he studied her more carefully. The stories his commanding officers told painted the Varnathi as monsters, savage aliens who showed no mercy, felt no pain. But the woman before him was clearly suffering, clearly afraid, and clearly abandoned by her own people if she was out here alone. What happened to you? He asked gently. Kiraveth's hand unconsciously moved to the scar on her face. Mission failed. Team died. I survived. In my culture, this makes me... She struggled for the word in standard. Tainted. Broken. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, Dante said bluntly, earning a surprised look from her. You survived. That means you're strong, not weak. You do not understand. I am... She gestured helplessly at her scarred face, her damaged leg. You're hurt, Dante finished. And hurt people need help, not judgment. He stood and shouldered his pack. There's an abandoned research station about a click from here. Neutral territory, technically. You can rest there, get your strength back. Kiraveth stared at him in bewilderment. Why? I am your enemy. Dante considered this, then shook his head. Right now, you're just someone who needs help. That's enough. For me. When she tried to stand, her leg buckled immediately. Without hesitation, Dante caught her, then carefully lifted her into his arms. She tensed, expecting pain or rough handling, but his touch was gentle, careful of her injuries. I've carried wounded before, he said softly, as if reading her thoughts. You're not my enemy right now. You're just someone who needs to get to safety. The walk to the research station took 20 minutes, during which Kiraveth found herself studying her unlikely rescuer. His heartbeat was steady against her ear, his breathing even despite carrying her weight. She had been taught that humans were cruel, savage creatures who knew only violence and conquest. But this human, this Dante, carried her as if she were something precious, not a burden. The research station was a small prefabricated building, its solar panels still functional despite obvious abandonment. Dante used his military override codes to open the door, revealing a basic but clean interior with sleeping quarters, a small medical bay, and food stores. He settled her carefully on one of the beds, then immediately began checking her injuries with practiced efficiency. This leg needs proper attention, he murmured, his hands gentle as he examined the poorly healed bone. And this scar, it's still infected around the edges. You have medical training? She asked, surprised. Field medic certification? Seemed like a good idea in a war zone. He moved to the medical supplies, pulling out antiseptic and bandages. This might hurt a bit. As he cleaned and dressed her wounds, Kiraveth found herself relaxing for the first time in days. His touch was professional but kind, and he talked quietly as he worked, about the weather, about the strange beauty of the crystalline formations, outside about anything except the war that had brought them both to this place. Why are you doing this? She asked as he finished with her leg. Dante paused in his work, considering the question. My grandmother used to say that the measure of a person isn't in their strength, but in how they treat those who can't defend themselves. Right now, that's you. Your people will not understand. My people aren't here, he replied simply, and neither are yours. Right now, it's just us, and you need help. As exhaustion finally claimed her, Kiraveth felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood: safety. For the first time since the explosion that had changed her life, she slept without nightmares, protected by the kindness of a stranger who saw her not as an enemy or a failure, but simply as someone worth saving. 3 days passed in the sanctuary of the abandoned research station, and Kiraveth began to understand why her people feared humans so much, not for their cruelty, but for their unexpected capacity for compassion. Each morning, she woke to find Dante already up, preparing simple meals from the station's emergency rations and checking her injuries with the methodical care of someone who genuinely wanted her to heal. The swelling in your leg is going down, he announced on the 4th morning, his hands gentle as he examined the formerly broken bone. Whatever field surgery you got wasn't completely terrible. I did it myself, Kiraveth admitted, sitting up on the narrow bed. After the explosion, used a piece of debris as a splint. Dante's hand stilled. You set your own broken leg? While wounded and alone? I had to. No one else would. The words came out matter-of-factly, but she saw something flash in his dark eyes. Not pity, but something deeper. Respect, perhaps. That's the most badass thing I've ever heard, he said quietly. And I've known some tough soldiers. The simple admiration in his voice made her chest tight with an emotion she couldn't name. In my culture, it is shameful. I should have died with honor rather than survive with scars. Your culture is wrong. The words were spoken with such conviction that she looked up, startled. Survival isn't shameful. It's miraculous. Those scars? He gestured gently toward her face. They're proof that you're stronger than whatever tried to kill you. Kiraveth had never thought of her injuries that way. In Varnathi society, scars were marks of failure, signs that a warrior had been careless or weak. But Dante spoke of them as if they were badges of honor, proof of battles fought and won. "How do you see the world so differently?" she asked, genuinely curious. Dante settled beside her on the bed, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Maybe it's because humans are fragile. We break easily, scar quickly, die young. We can't afford to see damage as weakness because then we'd all be worthless." He paused, studying her face. "Or maybe it's because beauty isn't about perfection. It's about surviving with grace." The word beauty hung in the air between them. Kiraveth touched her scarred cheek self-consciously. "I was considered attractive once before." "You're still attractive," Dante said simply. "The scar doesn't change that. If anything, it makes you more interesting, more real." Their eyes met, and something shifted between them. A subtle change in the atmosphere that made her heart race. She had never been this close to a human before, had never noticed how expressive their eyes could be, how their faces revealed every emotion. "I do not understand you," she whispered. "What's not to understand? You risk your career, your life, for someone you barely know, someone you're supposed to hate." Dante was quiet for a long moment, then reached out to gently touch her uninjured cheek. "I don't hate you, I couldn't if I tried. You're remarkable, Kiraveth, brave and strong and beautiful, even if you can't see it yourself." The touch of his hand on her skin sent electricity through her entire body. Varnathi rarely touched casually. Physical contact was reserved for family, lovers, or combat. But Dante's touch was different, warm and comforting in a way that made her want to lean into it. "Dante," she began, but he was already pulling his hand away. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" "No." She caught his hand, pressing it back to her cheek. "Please, I have not been touched with kindness in so long." Their faces were inches apart now, and she could see the conflict in his eyes, duty warring with desire, propriety fighting with something deeper. "Kira, I know this is forbidden," she whispered. "I know what our peoples would say, but I do not care. For the first time in my life, someone sees me as more than a weapon or a failure." "You're so much more than that," he murmured, his thumb tracing the edge of her scar with infinite gentleness. "You're incredible." The kiss was soft at first, tentative, both of them testing boundaries they had never crossed before. Her lips were slightly cooler than human normal, but they warmed under his touch, and when she deepened the kiss, he tasted something like cinnamon and starlight. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "This is insane," Dante said, but he didn't pull away. "Yes," Kiraveth agreed, her green eyes bright with something that might have been tears. "Completely insane. We're from different species. We're supposed to be enemies. Yes. This could get us both killed." "Yes. I don't care," he said fiercely, pulling her closer. "I should, but I don't. These past few days with you, I've never felt anything like this before, nor have I," she admitted, her hands fisting in his uniform. "I was taught that humans were monsters, cold, cruel, without honor. But you saved me when my own people cast me out. You see beauty where they see only shame." They held each other in the quiet of the research station, two souls from different worlds finding something precious in the space between hatred and hope. Outside, the war continued, but inside their small sanctuary, they had found something worth fighting for. Not territory or ideology, but the simple, revolutionary idea that love could exist between any two hearts brave enough to reach for it. "What happens now?" Kiraveth asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "I don't know," Dante admitted. "But whatever happens, we'll face it together." The next morning brought a dangerous new intimacy between them. Kiraveth woke to find herself curled against Dante's chest, their legs intertwined, his arm protective around her waist. In the soft light filtering through the station's windows, she studied his sleeping face, the strong jaw, the laugh lines around his eyes, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. "Good morning," he murmured without opening his eyes, his voice husky with sleep. "How did you know I was awake?" "Your breathing changed." He opened his eyes and smiled at her. Plus, you've been staring at me for the past 5 minutes. Heat flooded her pale green cheeks. I was not staring. You were definitely staring. His hand moved to trace the line of her jaw, careful around her scar. I don't mind. I like the way you look at me. How do I look at you? Like I'm not the enemy. Like I'm just... Dante. She leaned into his touch, marveling at how right this felt despite being utterly wrong by every standard they had been raised with. You are just Dante to me. Not human, not soldier. Just... you. Their second kiss was hungrier than the first, months of loneliness and years of conflict, dissolving into desperate need. Her hands explored the solid warmth of his chest through his shirt, while his fingers tangled in her red hair, careful not to pull too hard. Kira, he breathed against her lips. Are you sure about this? Instead of answering with words, she began unfastening his uniform jacket, her movements deliberate despite the slight tremor in her hands. He helped her, their clothes joining the pile of abandoned armor and weapons beside the bed, symbols of a war that suddenly seemed very far away, the morning light. Their differences were more apparent. His darker skin against her pale green, the way her hair caught the light like living flame, the subtle differences in their anatomy that spoke to their separate evolution. But somehow, these differences only made their connection more precious, more intentional. You're beautiful, Dante whispered, his hands mapping the curves of her body with reverent care. Where others saw scars and weakness, he saw strength and survival, each mark a story of battles fought and won. Their lovemaking was gentle at first, both of them learning the language of the other's body, discovering what brought pleasure and what caused pain. But as the morning progressed, gentleness gave way to passion, and passion to something deeper, a claiming of each other that transcended species and circumstance. Afterward, they lay entwined, skin cooling in the recycled air, hearts still racing from the intensity of their connection. Kiraveth traced patterns on Dante's chest, marveling at the way his heartbeat gradually slowed under her touch. In my culture, she said quietly, what we just did would be considered the highest form of dishonor. Coupling with an alien, an enemy. I would be executed for it, and in mine I'd be court-martialed at minimum, Dante replied, his fingers combing through her hair. Probably worse. Do you regret it? No. His answer was immediate and certain. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. You? No. Regrets, she said, then hesitated. Only fear. Of what? Of what happens when this ends. Because it must end, Dante. We both know that. He was quiet for a long moment, his arms tightening around her. Maybe it doesn't have to. How could it not? I am exiled from my people. You have duties to yours. This station is not the real world. Then maybe we make our own world, he said fiercely. There are colonies on the rim, places where no one asks about your species or your past. We could... He was interrupted by the sharp whine of approaching vehicles. Both of them froze, then moved with trained efficiency, rolling apart and reaching for their weapons. Through the station's small window, they could see dust clouds on the horizon, 2 sets of them approaching from different directions. Varnathi hunters, Kiraveth breathed, recognizing the distinctive formation. And humans. They must have tracked us. Dante was already pulling on his uniform, his expression grim. How long do we have? Minutes. Maybe less. She struggled into her own clothes, her injured leg protesting the sudden movement. Dante, listen to me. When they arrive, you must act as if you captured me. Tell them I was wounded, that you were bringing me in for interrogation. I won't. You must. Her voice was sharp with desperation. It is the only way either of us survives this. I will not let them execute you for showing kindness. The sound of engines grew louder, closer. Dante grabbed her shoulders, his eyes intense. This isn't over, Kira. Whatever happens out there, this isn't over. I know, she whispered, then kissed him one last time, soft, desperate, full of everything they couldn't say. The first vehicles crested the ridge just as they broke apart. Dante's weapon trained on her with professional precision, both of them slipping back into the roles that war had written for them. But something had changed between them, something that no amount of protocol or prejudice could erase. As the rescue parties or hunting parties surrounded the station, Kiraveth and Dante shared one last look across the space between them. In that look was a promise. This was not an ending, but a beginning, and whatever it took, they would find their way back to each other. The war had given them scars, but it had also given them something worth fighting for. Now they just had to survive long enough to claim it. The confrontation unfolded with the brutal efficiency of a military operation. Varnathi hunters surrounded the station from the east, while human colonial forces approached from the west, their weapons trained on the small building that had become sanctuary for two unlikely lovers. Commander Thane Voss, a weathered human officer with steel-gray hair, was the first through the door, his rifle ready. Behind him came Lieutenant Kexara, a Varnathi warrior whose forearms marked her as nobility, her bioluminescent tattoos pulsing with barely contained aggression. "Corporal Rivera," Voss barked. "Report." Dante stood at attention, his weapon still trained on Kiraveth, who knelt with her hands behind her head in the universal position of surrender. To anyone watching, it looked like a textbook capture scenario. "Sir, I found this Varnathi scout wounded in the neutral zone. She's been unconscious for most of the past 4 days. I was preparing to transport her for interrogation when you arrived." Lieutenant Kexara's black eyes fixed on Kiraveth with undisguised disgust. "This is the exile Kiraveth. She has brought shame to our people and should have been left to die in the wasteland." "Funny," Voss replied. "That's exactly what I was thinking about any human who'd risk his career to save an alien." The tension in the room was palpable. Both sides suspected something more than a simple capture, but neither could prove it. Dante's story was plausible, and Kiraveth's injuries were real enough to support the narrative of a wounded scout taken prisoner. "I will take custody of the exile," Kexara declared, her primary arms reaching for Kiraveth. "Like hell you will," Voss shot back. "She's our prisoner now, taken by our soldier. Intelligence will want to debrief her. She is Varnathi. She returns with us. She's a prisoner of war. She stays with us." As the two officers argued, Dante caught Kiraveth's eye. She gave an almost imperceptible nod toward the rear exit of the station. They had perhaps seconds before the situation escalated beyond control. "Actually," Dante said loudly, "I think you're both wrong." Everyone turned to stare at him. "Explain yourself, Corporal," Voss demanded. "Well, sir, I've been listening to the prisoner for 4 days now. Delirious talk mostly, but she's mentioned something interesting. Seems there's a group of Varnathi and humans working together on some rim-world colonies. Deserters mostly, but some are just tired of the war." Kiraveth picked up his improvisation smoothly. "He speaks truth," she said, her accent thick with apparent weakness. "My people, your people, some have found new way. Together." "Impossible," Kexara hissed. "Is it?" Dante asked. "What if some of us are just tired of killing each other over rocks and empty space? What if some of us think there's got to be a better way?" "Corporal Rivera," Voss said dangerously, "you're walking very close to a line here." "Maybe I'm already across it, sir." Dante's voice was steady, but his hand had shifted subtly on his weapon. "Maybe I've seen enough of this war to know it's not going to end with victory. It's going to end with extinction for both our species." "Treasonous words," Kexara snarled, raising her weapons. "Treasonous?" Kiraveth struggled to her feet, her injured leg trembling but her voice growing stronger. "Or honest. How many of your warriors have you lost, Lieutenant? How many humans have died, Commander? And for what? For the right to claim a few more dead worlds?" "For honor," Kexara replied, but her voice lacked conviction. "Honor?" Kiraveth laughed bitterly. "I served with honor for 8 cycles. I bled for honor. I was cast out for surviving when honor demanded I die. And this human, this enemy, showed me more honor in 4 days than my own people showed me, in a lifetime." The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Then Dante made his choice. Moving with fluid precision, he spun his weapon away from Kiraveth and toward the mixed group of soldiers. At the same moment, she dove for the weapon cache they had prepared, coming up with a rifle of her own. "Nobody has to die here," Dante said calmly, though his weapon was trained on his own commanding officer. "But nobody's taking either of us prisoner either." "You're outnumbered 10-1, Voss pointed out. "Maybe," Kiraveth agreed, "but this station has a self-destruct sequence. Colonial emergency protocol for abandoned facilities. We all die, or we all walk away." It was a bluff. The station had no such system, but it was a believable one. The standoff stretched for heartbeats that felt like hours. Then, unexpectedly, one of the human soldiers, a young private barely out of training, lowered his weapon. "I'm tired of it too," he said quietly. "Tired of the killing. Tired of the dying. If they've found another way." The crack in the wall became a flood. Other soldiers, human and Varnathi alike, began to voice their doubts, their exhaustion, their secret hope that maybe, just maybe, there was another way forward. "This is madness," Kexara protested, but even she could see the mood shifting. "No," said Dante, "this is evolution." The negotiations that followed were tense, but ultimately successful. In exchange for safe passage to the neutral zone, Dante and Kiraveth would provide intelligence about the mixed colonies they had supposedly learned about. It was a fiction that became reality as they spoke. Other soldiers, inspired by their courage, began to speak of their own desires for an end to the conflict. 3 days later, aboard a transport bound for the Rim territories, Dante and Kiraveth sat together in the cargo hold, watching the stars wheel past through a small porthole. Her head rested on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, both of them still marveling at their unlikely survival. "Do you think we'll actually find these colonies?" she asked. "We'll find something," Dante replied, "even if we have to build it ourselves. A place where green skin and red hair doesn't make you alien. A place where love matters more than politics." She tilted her head to look at him, her scarred face beautiful in the starlight. "I love you, Dante Rivera. However impossible that is." "I love you too, Kiraveth, and it's not impossible. We're living proof that it's not." Behind them in the passenger section, 12 other soldiers, 6 human, 6 Varnathi, were making their own plans for a future where species mattered less than the courage to choose hope over hatred. They had all been cast out, in one way or another, by their respective peoples. But together they had found something worth more than military honor or cultural purity. They had found each other, and in doing so, had perhaps found the first seeds of a peace that neither government had been able to imagine. As the transport jumped to hyperspace, carrying them toward an uncertain but hopeful future, Dante and Kiraveth held each other close and dreamed of a world where sanctuary wasn't something you found in abandoned stations, but something you built with your own hands and defended with your own heart. The war would continue behind them, but ahead lay the possibility of something new, a dawn that belonged not to one species or another, but to all those brave enough to reach for it with open arms.